Dad waved from arrivals, smiling for the local news. "Welcome home," he said, as if 700 days of exile were just a vacation. At the curb, his wife lunged past security. The slap cracked loud in the jet wash. Tourist phones instantly aimed. I touched my split lip, glancing up at the blinking red light of the security camera. "Thanks for the pickup," I said. "I hope her company enjoys working with visual evidence." My name is Vera Quinn. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 700 days, I have lived in a place where the sun burns the sky white by 10 in the morning, and the only meaningful sound is the hum of a server farm. Tonight, I was back. Holloway Ridge International Airport. Sunday, 10:14 p.m. The air inside the terminal was a chilled, recycled breath tasting faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. Outside, through the automatic doors, it was a different world. The humid Tennessee night air, thick and heavy, was cut through with the sharp, intoxicating perfume of jet fuel. It was the smell of movement, of power, of departures and arrivals. For me, it was the smell of a starting gun. I pushed the single rolling suitcase ahead of me, its polyurethane wheels making a low, steady rumble over the polished concrete floors, a sound that changed pitch as I crossed the threshold from the terminal to the passenger pickup curb. The wheels stuttered and clicked over the ridged, tactile paving. A minor turbulence. I guided the suitcase with one hand, my knuckles white, my posture straight. My entire life, or what was left of it, had been compressed into the strategic packing of this one piece of luggage. Every item within had a purpose. There was no room for sentiment. I crossed the painted yellow line, the block letters spelling out, "No stopping," stark under the sodium lamps. This was Curb 3, the designated zone for livery and black car services, a place of quiet efficiency, but there was nothing quiet here tonight. Ahead, bathed in the sudden, harsh glare of a portable television light, stood my father, Grant Quinn, CEO of Evermere Systems, a man whose face was more familiar to the readers of the Grayford Heights Business Journal than it was to me. He was performing. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His Tom Ford suit hung with the kind of casual expense that takes effort, and his smile was a masterpiece of corporate warmth. He was giving an interview to a local news reporter, a young woman holding a microphone with the HRI News 7 logo on it. He wasn't looking for me. He was creating a narrative. The triumphant return of the CEO's daughter, a family united. He raised a hand, not to me, but to the camera's lens, a politician's wave. "Welcome home," he projected, his voice a familiar baritone, resonating with the false sincerity I'd studied my entire life. He said it as if my time away had been a sabbatical, a leisurely trip abroad, and not a calculated corporate exile to the most remote, soul-crushing subsidiary he owned. The scene was a tableau of manufactured reality, but reality has a way of being unscripted. From the periphery, a blur of motion, it was her, Elena Maris, my stepmother, the chief financial officer of Evermere Systems. She moved with the predatory grace of a creature who owned her environment. She ducked under the velvet rope that separated the designated press area from the curb, her stiletto heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the asphalt. Her face, usually a mask of controlled composure, was a tight knot of fury. Her eyes, two chips of cold obsidian, were locked on me. A single security guard, hired for the occasion, took a step to intercept her, then froze, his training and instinct overridden by the sudden recognition of his ultimate employer's wife. He became a statue, a useless sentry. She didn't slow. She covered the 10 feet between us in a heartbeat. I had time to register the scent of her perfume, Frederic Malle, a scent of privilege and power, and the glint of the overhead lights on the diamond bracelet circling her wrist. I had time to brace myself. I didn't flinch. The slap was a stunningly precise event. It wasn't wild or flailing. It was a targeted strike, all of her controlled rage channeled into the palm of her hand. The sound was sharp, a dry crack that cut through the low hum of airport traffic. It echoed for a moment in the cavernous space of the pickup lane. The impact sent a jolt up my jaw, and the taste of blood, metallic and warm, instantly filled my mouth. My head snapped to the side, my hair whipping across my face. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. The interview stopped. The reporter's mouth hung open, and then another sound. A chorus of clicks and electronic chimes. The tourists, the tired travelers waiting for their shuttles, the skycaps. They all raised their phones. The night, which had been dotted with the yellow of the sodium lamps, was now peppered with the brilliant white strobes of a dozen smartphone flashes. We were no longer on a private stage. We were a public spectacle. I brought my fingers slowly to my bottom lip. They came away slick with a smear of red. I didn't look at her, not yet. My gaze lifted, moving past her furious face, past my father's shocked and suddenly panicked expression, past the news camera that was now swiveling to capture the drama in its entirety. I looked up. There it was, a black, hemispherical dome mounted on a steel pole just above the curb. The Holloway Ridge Municipal Airport Authority traffic camera. A tiny, steady red light glowed on its underside. It was recording, always recording, an impartial, digital witness. From a few yards away, the door of a hotel shuttle bus hissed open. The driver, a middle-aged man with a graying mustache, leaned out slightly. He didn't shout, but he spoke into the sudden, tense silence with the clear, caring voice of someone used to being heard over an engine. "Hey now," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "That's a live feed." His words were almost certainly too quiet for most to hear, but not for the sensitive boom mic of the HRI News 7 sound guy, who was standing less than 10 feet away. I saw the microphone twitch in the driver's direction. Another data point captured, another thread in the net. Only then did I turn my head and meet Elena's glare. Her chest was heaving, her perfectly manicured hand still tingling from the impact. The blood on my lips seemed to fuel her rage rather than quell it. "You," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, "have just violated a federally regulated no-stopping zone and committed assault." I spoke clearly, my voice level and devoid of emotion. I enunciated each word, pitching my voice not to her, but to the recording devices around us, to the phones, to the news microphone, to the silent, blinking eye of the traffic camera. I was creating a legal record. Elena's face contorted. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, her expensive perfume a suffocating cloud. She leaned in, her lips close to my ear, the heat of her anger radiating against my cheek. "You will never set foot in that company again," she spat, each word a tiny, sharp icicle. "This is the end of the line for you, you ungrateful little—" I didn't let her finish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I held her gaze, my own eyes as calm and steady as the lens of the camera watching us. The sting on my cheek was a physical anchor, a reminder of the stakes. The blood on my tongue was a taste of victory. "I'm already there," I replied, my voice a quiet, confident statement of fact. "You just haven't seen it yet." The ride from the airport was a silent, refrigerated war. I sat in the back of the Lincoln town car, the same one that had ferried me to my exile 2 years ago. The leather was cold against my skin. My father sat in the front passenger seat, staring out at the blur of highway lights, the rigid line of his jaw illuminated in flashes of green and white. Elena was beside me, a coiled spring of fury, her breathing shallow and controlled. The scent of her perfume and the faint, coppery smell of my own blood created a nauseating cocktail in the confined space. No one spoke of the slap. It hung in the air, a physical presence, a sound replaying on a loop in the quiet hum of the engine. They were waiting for me to break, to cry, to rage. They were waiting for the daughter they had sent away. She wasn't here anymore. I stared out my own window, watching the familiar skyline of Grayford Heights materialize from the darkness. At its heart, a single tower of glass and steel pricked the night sky, its top floors illuminated like a crown. The Evermere Systems headquarters, my former prison, my future battleground. From the outside, Evermere is the very picture of modern corporate success. It's a sleek, 28-story monument to ambition. Located in the manicured corporate park just outside the city proper, the building's facade is a seamless curtain of reflective glass, mirroring the Tennessee sky with an impassive, blue-gray stare. Etched in discreet, elegant letters above the main entrance is the company motto: integrity. First, it's a good line, polished, reassuring. It looks excellent on promotional materials and government contract bids. For 25 years, it was the foundation of the company my father built, a leading developer of secure logistics and communications software for the Department of Defense. And for the last 10, it had been a bitter joke I told only to myself. My last real job there, before the strategic rotation, was as the head of risk assessment. It was a role that suited me. I'm not a visionary like my father claims to be, nor am I a financial predator like Elena. I am a cartographer of consequences. I draw maps of everything that can go wrong. I found patterns in chaos, and one day, I found a pattern that was a little too neat. A series of invoices from a third-party vendor showed consistent overbilling, always by the same small percentage, always on contracts overseen by the same project manager. It wasn't a massive fraud, not the kind that makes headlines. It was small, discreet. A pilot fish nibbling at the flank of the whale. It was a leak. My job was to plug leaks. I wrote a confidential report, followed protocol, and submitted it to the Internal Audit Committee, which consisted of my father and Elena. The meeting was in my father's office. The view from the 28th floor is panoramic, designed to make a person feel like a master of the universe. That day, it felt like being on a ledge. My report sat on the polished mahogany between them. My father steepled his fingers, a gesture I knew meant he was about to deliver a paternalistic lecture. "Vera," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "This is aggressive. You're questioning the judgment of a man who's been with us for 15 years. "I'm questioning his math," I replied, keeping my voice flat. "The numbers are clear." Elena, sitting opposite me, hadn't touched the report. She simply smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "What Vera is failing to appreciate," she said, addressing my father as if I weren't in the room, "is the difference between a problem and a solution. This man solves problems for us. Grant, he gets things done. Sometimes, solutions have administrative costs." The message was clear. The leak was not a flaw. It was a feature. I had not uncovered a crime. I had stumbled into a mechanism. A week later, my strategic rotation was announced in a company-wide email. I was being sent to manage the data archiving facility in the New Mexico desert. It was a career cul-de-sac, a place where ambition went to die under a relentless sun. My father sold it to me as an opportunity. "You need to see the whole board, Vera, not just your little corner of it," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of hollow comfort. "Think of it as a lesson in humility." Elena was more direct. We were in the kitchen of the family home, the house my mother had decorated, now sterile and cold under Elena's touch. She was wiping down a marble countertop that was already spotless. "Someone has to take out the trash," she said, not looking at me, her voice as clean and hard as the stone beneath her hand. "This time, it's you." She had arrived in our lives 5 years after my mother's death from cancer. She came with a Wharton MBA, a portfolio of strategic corporate friendships, and a collection of sympathetic smiles she deployed with tactical precision. Her marriage to my father was less a romance and more a merger, complete with a prenuptial agreement so thick it could have served as a legal textbook. It protected his assets, but more importantly, it secured her position. She became CFO within 18 months. Power in our family wasn't about love, it was about titles and shares. She ran the company's finances with an iron fist and a series of password-protected spreadsheets. Her primary file, the one that held the real numbers and projections, was a document I'd only ever heard whispered about by a nervous accountant in the finance department. He called it the garden. because, as he put it, that's where all the bodies are buried. The board of directors was no help. It was composed of two factions, both loyal to the status quo. The first was a trio of my father's old golfing buddies, men whose primary function was to nod in agreement and collect their generous directors' fees. The second was a pair of representatives from two venture capital firms who had invested heavily a decade ago. They were young, ruthless, and utterly indifferent to anything but cash flow and quarterly earnings reports. Complaining to them about ethical lapses would be like complaining to a shark about its teeth. So I learned to be quiet. In the years leading up to my exile, I sat in board meetings and said nothing. I became furniture, but I watched. I listened. I learned to read the subtle language of power that flowed around the conference table. A slight narrowing of a VC's eyes when discussing margin calls. A wink my father shared with an old friend after announcing a successful, if ethically dubious, contract negotiation. I memorized every glance, every hesitation, every lie told by omission. I became an invisible archivist of their sins. The day I left for New Mexico, Elena walked me to the door. She stood there, silhouetted against the light, a vision of triumphant domesticity. "Remember, Vera," she said, her voice laced with a final patronizing sweetness. "Family are the ones who stay at the table." She was right. I was leaving the table, but I wasn't running away. I was leaving the table to go into the kitchen, lock the doors, and burn the whole damn dining room to the ground. Which brings me back to my suitcase, rumbling quietly behind me as the bellman leads me down the hallway of a downtown hotel I'd booked under a different name. The contents are Spartan, but specific. There are clothes, toiletries, a laptop, and beneath them, nestled in protective casing, are 3 items. The first is a key, though not to any door. The second is a thick sheaf of papers, a legal document granting me power of attorney, proxy rights, for a significant block of company shares. The third is a small, encrypted solid-state drive, a clip. As I close the hotel room door behind me, the silence is a welcome relief. It's the silence of a staging ground, the silence before the storm. Elena thinks she ended things tonight with a slap at the curb. She's wrong. She just fired the starting pistol, and the evidence of her act, the digital clip from that airport camera, is already on its way to becoming the first exhibit in the case I've spent 2 years building. Exile has a certain clarity. In Grayford Heights, my life was a symphony of noise. The demands of my job, the passive-aggressive ballet of family dinners, the constant, low-grade hum of corporate politics. In the New Mexico desert, there was only silence, the sun, and the hum of the server farm. They sent me to the data archiving facility to become invisible, to be forgotten. They didn't realize that in the silence, for the first time, I could truly hear. In the isolation, I could finally see the whole board. My duties were minimal, a glorified sysadmin role designed for a person with no ambition. It left me with an abundance of time. 6 weeks into my sentence, a discreet, encrypted email arrived from a source I didn't recognize. It was a contract proposal. A New York-based private equity fund, Quiet Harbor Capital, was looking for a freelance forensic auditor. They specialized in hostile takeovers and needed someone to find the rot inside a company before they made their move. The work was anonymous, conducted through secure channels, and paid exceedingly well. They didn't know I was Vera Quinn, the disgraced daughter of a defense contractor. They only knew my resume, scrubbed of my name, which showcased a talent for finding financial needles in digital haystacks. I accepted immediately. My exile had just become my camouflage. For 18 months, I hunted for other people's secrets. By day, I was the forgotten manager of a data tomb. By night, I was a ghost in the machine, sifting through terabytes of corporate data for Quiet Harbor. And all the while, I was building. With the resources and the paychecks from the fund, I began constructing my own tool. I called it Babel. Babel was an algorithmic auditing engine, an infinitely more powerful version of the kind of analysis I used to do at Evermere. It wasn't just about numbers. It was a pattern recognition system designed to ingest a company's entire supply chain data stream, invoices, payment schedules, vendor contracts, shipping manifests, and cross-reference it for anomalies. It looked for the tells of human greed, split invoices designed to fly under approval thresholds, phantom vendors with PO box addresses, and my personal favorite, the perfectly round number. Embezzlers are lazy. They rarely bill for 49,000. They bill for $50,000. It's a small, psychological vanity, and it's as good as a fingerprint. While I worked for Quiet Harbor, I was secretly feeding Babel Evermere's publicly available contract data, teaching it the rhythms and habits of my own family's company. Then, I used a contact from a previous audit, a disgruntled IT manager at one of Evermere's payroll processors, to get a full data dump of their accounts payable for the last 5 years. It was the digital equivalent of being handed the keys to the vault. I let Babel run for 72 hours. The result was a single, flashing red flag on my monitor. A consulting firm called Mintford Analytics. Over 3 years, Mintford had received payments totaling just over $4 million. Nearly every single payment was a round number: $75,000, $120,000, $50,000. They were listed as providing strategic market analysis, a term so vague as to be meaningless. This was Elena's garden. I had found the first headstone. Using Quiet Harbor's legal resources, attributing the queries to one of their own anonymous projects, I started digging into Mintford. On the surface, it was clean, registered in Delaware, owned by a holding company in Wyoming, which was in turn owned by a trust. But trusts have trustees. After 3 weeks of legal filings and database searches, I found him. The sole beneficiary of the trust was a Mr. Julian Maris, Elena's younger brother, a man who, to my knowledge, had never held a job more complex than managing a high-end car dealership. This was the mechanism. Elena wasn't stealing directly. She was overpaying her own brother for non-existent services, bleeding the company through 1,000 tiny, approved cuts, and calling it a business expense. Exposing it would be messy. A case of my word against hers. She would claim it was a legitimate contract, that she had no knowledge of her brother's ownership. My father would back her. I would be painted as a vengeful daughter, and the board would close ranks. I didn't need an accusation. I needed leverage. Mintford Analytics, like many small, cash-rich, but poorly managed businesses, was sloppy. They had taken out a business loan 2 years prior from a regional bank, using their Evermere contract as collateral. They had missed several payments. The bank, eager to clear a non-performing asset from its books, sold the bad debt to a secondary investment market for pennies on the dollar. I created my own shell corporation, a simple LLC registered in Nevada, Alder Row Holdings, through a broker. Alder Row purchased the entirety of Mintford Analytics' outstanding debt. The transaction cost me nearly a year of my Quiet Harbor salary, but it was the best money I ever spent. Suddenly, I was no longer an outsider. I was Julian Maris's primary creditor, and as the holder of his defaulted loan, I had a legal right that even Elena couldn't block. The right to a full audit of his company's books, records, and internal communications to assess its viability for repayment. I had a key to the garden. While my lawyer sent the official notices to Mintford, I worked on the other pieces of the trap. I went onto Evermere's public-facing investor relations site and downloaded the Corporate Governance and Ethics Handbook. I read the entire 112-page document, a monument to boilerplate hypocrisy, and there, on page 87, Section 4, Subsection C, I found the perfect tool: conduct of key executives. It stated that any executive officer engaging in public behavior that brings the company into disrepute, including but not limited to acts of violence, public intoxication, or moral turpitude, shall be considered to be in material breach of their employment contract. A material breach was grounds for immediate suspension pending a full board review. I saved a time-stamped PDF of the page. The final piece was the most delicate. It was about power, not just legal or financial, but political. I knew I couldn't win a fight on the board with 0 allies, so I went looking for them in the one place Elena and my father never thought to look: the company's rank and file. Evermere has an employee hardship fund, a small charity funded by payroll deductions, to help employees facing catastrophic life events, usually medical crises. It was poorly managed and perpetually underfunded. I started monitoring it. Through another anonymous LLC, I began making targeted donations. An employee in the engineering department needed an experimental cancer treatment for his wife. I covered the entire cost. A coder in the beta testing division had a child with a rare genetic disorder. I funded the home nursing care for a full year. The donations came with one condition. In exchange for the life-altering financial aid, the employee would sign over their proxy voting rights for all their vested company shares to my holding company for a period of 12 calendar months. It was a cold transaction, but I was offering them a certainty their employer never would. I was saving their families. They were giving me ammunition. Over the course of a year, I quietly and methodically paid medical bills for 23 separate employees. I never met them. They never knew my name. They only knew that in their darkest hour, an anonymous benefactor had appeared. 2 weeks before my scheduled return, I tallied the results. The proxies I had collected, combined with the small block of shares I had inherited from my mother, gave me control of just over 18% of the company's voting stock. I checked the company bylaws again. Any shareholder or coalition of shareholders holding more than 15% could force an emergency meeting of the board to address a material concern, such as a conflict of interest or a breach of the ethics code. I had the proof of financial fraud from Mintford's books. I had the ethics clause from their own handbook, and I had the votes to force them to listen. All I needed was the triggering event, a public display, a material breach, a slap, perhaps captured on camera. On the secure laptop in my anonymous hotel room, I drafted the formal request for the special meeting. I left the date and the list of grievances blank for now, but I gave the meeting a title. It was the only piece of sentimentality I allowed myself in the entire 2-year campaign. I typed the 2 words that had been echoing in my head since the moment my plane touched down. The name of the meeting was Welcome Home. The hotel room is a box of chilled, silent air. It's 11:18 p.m. The sting on my cheek has faded to a dull, persistent throb. A physical metronome for the work ahead. I don't unpack. I set my suitcase by the door, retrieve my laptop, and sit at the desk. The window overlooks a parking garage, a perfect void of concrete and yellow light. There is no one to watch me. I am, for now, exactly what they made me. Invisible. My first act is not one of anger, but of administration. The process is cold, a series of calculated legal steps. The foundation of this entire operation rests on a simple, bureaucratic fact. Holloway Ridge International Airport is not a private entity. It is owned by the municipality of Grayford Heights. Its cameras, its logs, its security feeds, they are not private property, they are public records. I open a secure browser, navigate to the city's public records portal, and log into an account I created a month ago under the name of a paralegal from my shell company. I select Submit a New Request under the Freedom of Information Act. The form is simple. I fill in the boxes with the precision of a surgeon. Requesting agency, Alder Row Holdings, Legal Department. Nature of request, expedited release of video surveillance footage. Specific location, Holloway Ridge International Airport, HRI. Terminal A, passenger pickup. Curb 3, directly opposite baggage claim door A4. Time frame, Sunday, October 17th, 2025, 22:10, 10:10 p.m. to 22:20, 10:20 p.m., camera S. Requested all stationary traffic and security cameras with visibility of the specified location. Reference, camera pole ID M1137C3. Justification for expedited request. Footage pertains to a public event involving a potential assault in violation of municipal code, prohibited stopping, evidence of which is time-sensitive. I know the camera pole ID because I mapped the entire airport security system 6 months ago from publicly available blueprints. I know the 72-hour rule for data retention. The bureaucratic window before unflagged footage is taped over. By filing within the first hour, I have flagged it. The legal clock has started. I attach the filing fee via a corporate credit card tied to Alder Row. I hit Submit. A reference number appears on the screen. FOIA 2025 481516. This number is my first key. My second act is defensive. I open an encrypted email client and compose a message to the law firm that Quiet Harbor Capital keeps on retainer for its most sensitive operations. I have never spoken to them. I know them only as a routing number and an encrypted signature. 2. Counsel. Preservation notice. Evermere Systems. Execute litigation. Hold notice attached. Served to Evermere General Counsel by 0800 Iste. Preservation must be immediate and comprehensive. Individuals to be named: Grant Quinn, Elena Maris, and one unnamed male PR representative present at FOIA 2025 481516. Event, scope: all company-issued mobile devices, laptops, and email accounts. Basis: pending shareholder action regarding potential material breach of corporate ethics. Section 4C. I attach the pre-drafted legal notice. This move prevents Elena, my father, or their handler from deleting any texts, emails, or personal photos from the incident, their panicked communications. Their attempts at narrative control are now legally required to be saved. They are frozen. My third act is forensics. The public is faster than the government. I open a new browser window and navigate to the HRI News 7 website. The reporter, the young woman from the curb, has already posted. It's a 45-second clip on the station's local beat blog. The headline: Tense Family Confrontation for Evermere CEO at Airport. The clip is shaky, focused on my father's face, then panning wildly to Elena as she lunges. It captures the sound of the slap, a sharp crack that makes the cameraman visibly jolt. This is good, but it's not enough. I go to Twitter, I search Evermere and Halloway Airport. It takes less than a minute. A tourist from Ohio, waiting for his shuttle, has posted his own video. Crazy! Wife of some CEO just smacked this lady at the curb. Grayford Heights drama. His angle is different, wider, from the side. It clearly shows Elena crossing the no stopping line and me standing perfectly still. A second video, posted to Instagram, is from behind me, capturing the back of my head and the full, unadulterated fury on Elena's face. I download all 3 clips. The audio on them is terrible, a wall of jet noise and car horns. But the reporter's audio was clean, the boom mic, the bus driver. I go back to the News 7 site. I use a developer tool to inspect the page's source code, find the raw media file for the video, and download the original, high bitrate MP4 file. I now have the audio I need. I feed all 4 files, 3 videos, 1 high-quality audio track, into Babel. My auditing tool was designed to find financial fraud, but I adapted it for this. Its pattern recognition algorithms are not just for numbers. I initiate the forensic sync protocol. Babel's process is cold and immediate. Ingest. 4 media files loaded. Metadata strip, EXIF, and device data extracted from all files. Timestamps confirmed as synchronous. Audio isolate. High-fidelity audio from News 7 file isolated. Waveform is scanned for key phrases. Phrase tag. Committed assault. V. Quinn. Never set foot. E. Morris. Live feed. Unidentified male. Video sync. All 3 video angles are synchronized to the isolated audio track, using the crack of the slap as the 0 point. Geo confirm. Cross-references visual data with saved airport blueprints. Confirms location. Curb 3, M1137C3. Render. A single, multi-angle video file is created. Top left, News 7 angle. Top right, Tourist 1 angle. Bottom left, Tourist 2 angle. The high-fidelity audio is the only track. A running timestamp, accurate to the millisecond, is burned into the bottom of the frame. Chain of custody. Create. The final file is rendered, encrypted, and given a unique digital signature, SHA-256 hash. It is no longer just a video, it is a sealed, verifiable piece of evidence. E001, Public Incident HRI, MP4. This file, E001, is my second key. Now, I review the weapon. I open the 112-page Evermere Corporate Governance and Ethics Handbook. I navigate to page 87, Section 4C. I read the words my father's lawyers wrote, words they never imagined would be used against them. Any executive officer engaging in public behavior that brings the company into disrepute shall be considered to be in material breach. But I read further. The real trigger, the one the VCs on the board care about, is in the next paragraph. Public conduct harmful to contracts. Evermere's multi-billion-dollar DoD contracts are contingent on the company and its key personnel passing moral and ethical character reviews. Elena, the CFO, assaulting someone in public, on camera, is not a family misunderstanding. It is a direct threat to the company's revenue stream. It is a liability that costs money. Finally, I set the trap, a dead man's switch. I create a new encrypted package. I add E001, Public Incident HRI, MP4. I add the PDF of my filed FOIA request. I add the time-stamped PDF of the Ethics Handbook. Page 87. I draft my formal shareholder request for the Welcome Home emergency meeting, citing my 18% proxy control and the material breach of the CFO. I upload this package to a secure server. I write a simple script, an automated delivery system. The recipient list is precise. The 2 independent directors on the board, the head of the audit committee, and the lead counsels for the 2 VC funds. The script is set with 2 triggers. It's an escrow. Trigger 1. An automated web scraper monitors the HRI News 7 website and the Grayford Heights Business Journal. The moment a formal article, not a blog post, is published with the keywords Elena Maris, airport, and assault, or altercation, the first lock opens. Trigger 2. A second script monitors the city's FOIA portal. The moment the status of FOA 2025-4811516 changes to fulfilled, meaning the city has officially released the high-resolution government-owned footage to me, the second lock opens. When both triggers are active, the package is digitally signed and sent to all recipients simultaneously. My work is done. It is 12:30 a.m. I don't have to leak anything. I don't have to be a whistleblower. I don't have to be the accuser. Elena did the work for me. The press, in their hunger for content, will provide trigger 1. The city, in its bureaucratic, law-abiding efficiency, will provide trigger 2. I am not the one throwing the grenade. I am simply the shareholder who is legally obligated to point out that the CFO has pulled the pin on one and is holding it in the middle of the boardroom. Elena's slap at the curb was not an end. It was a public event. It was the verifiable, irrefutable act I needed. The door to my Welcome Home meeting is now unlocked. All I have to do is wait for the morning news. I slept for 6 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety, but from habit. The hotel room was still, the air humming with the sound of the climate control. I made coffee using the cheap in-room machine. The bitter, burnt smell, a welcome dose of normalcy. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't need to. I sat with my laptop, a silent observer watching the first ripples spread across the water. The story broke at 6:15 a.m. During the HRI News 7. Sunrise report. It wasn't the lead. It was a 30-second filler piece just before the weather forecast. The anchor. A man with impossibly white teeth. Read the teleprompter with practiced indifference. A tense moment at Holloway Ridge International last night, as the family of local CEO Grant Quinn was involved in a minor scuffle at the passenger pickup curb. The shaky phone footage from the night before filled the screen. It was blurry, chaotic. It showed Elena's lunge, the impact, and my stillness. They didn't use the reporter's clean audio, just the ambient noise of the airport. It was presented as a curiosity, a moment of local color. The anchor ended with a chuckle. Looks like someone wasn't happy to be home. Now, let's check in with meteorologist Dawn for a look at your morning commute. And that should have been the end of it, a piece of disposable gossip. But they made a critical error. They used Elena's full name and title. They identified her. By 7:30 a.m., the first spark had caught. A user on the Grayford Heights community Facebook group posted the clip. "Is this Elena Maris, the CFO of Evermere? The one who spoke at my kids' school about female leadership?" The post garnered 12 likes and 3 comments. By 8 o'clock a.m., it had over 100 shares. People who had been laid off from Evermere, vendors who had been squeezed on payments, former executives who had been forced out. They all recognized her. The anonymity of the CEO's wife was gone. She was a known quantity, and for many, a disliked one. The hashtag appeared around 9 o'clock a.m. It was simple, derisive, and sticky. Curbside CFO. It started on Twitter, posted by a local tech blogger. He didn't add much commentary, just the clip and the tag, but it was enough. The tag gave the scattered outrage a banner to rally under. It became a container for every grievance, real or imagined, against the company. It was no longer about a family spat. It was about corporate arrogance. At 10:17 a.m., the Evermere PR department responded. It was a textbook example of corporate panic, a statement so bland and dismissive it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. It was posted to their official Twitter and Facebook accounts. An incident involving an Evermere executive last night was a private family misunderstanding that was unfortunately captured on video. We ask that the privacy of the Quinn and Morris families be respected during this time. Our focus remains on delivering the world-class results our clients and shareholders expect. Integrity first. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The comments under the post were a torrent of mockery and anger. My private family misunderstanding doesn't usually involve assault in a public space. Is respecting their privacy the same as ignoring a potential crime? The use of their own motto, integrity first, was a self-inflicted wound, and the internet sharks smelled blood. At 11:30 a.m., the narrative pivoted. A man named David Ackerman, a Washington-based journalist who runs a subscription newsletter on government contracting, tweeted to his 50,000 followers. He didn't post the video. He posted a question. Seeing a lot of chatter about an exec at a major DoD software contractor, Evermere, puts a spotlight on an often overlooked aspect of federal contracts, the moral and ethical character clauses. Public conduct of key personnel absolutely matters when you're handling sensitive national security data. The ripple had reached a bigger pond. Ackerman's followers weren't local gossips. They were policy analysts, Pentagon officials, and rival contractors. He had reframed the entire event, elevating it from a local spectacle to a national security concern. This was my cue. From my anonymous hotel room, I performed my one and only active intervention in the media storm. I had a list of a dozen niche industry blogs, the kind that are read religiously by people inside the Beltway. I chose one. The Sentinel Audit, known for its meticulous, unflashy analysis of corporate governance in the defense sector, using a secure single-use email address. I sent the blog's editor a simple, anonymous tip. Subject: Evermere Systems. Public Filings. Body: You may find Section 4, Subsection C of Evermere's publicly available Corporate Governance and Ethics Handbook relevant to today's news. I attached the time-stamped PDF of page 87. I hit send. The email account deleted itself a second later. At 2 p.m., the Sentinel Audit published an article. The headline was dry, clinical, and devastating. Evermere CFO's public altercation may trigger material breach of ethics code. Internal documents show. The article didn't speculate. It didn't sensationalize. It simply laid the video of the slap alongside the precise, legalistic language of their own ethics clause. It was a juxtaposition of pure damning fact. Now, anyone searching for curbside CFO would find not just the video, but a professional analysis of its potential consequences. The dominoes began to fall faster. By late afternoon, the story was picked up by national tech news sites. The angle had solidified. This wasn't about family drama. It was about a culture of impunity at a major government contractor. The slap was no longer just a slap. It was a symbol. At 4:45 p.m., an encrypted message landed in my inbox. It was from the lead investigative journalist at a major national newspaper, a woman whose work I had followed for years. A contact at Quiet Harbor had passed my anonymous credentials to her. I am looking for an off-the-record conversation with a source regarding the corporate culture at Evermere Systems. Your anonymity is guaranteed. Are you available to speak? The bait was now being taken by the biggest fish in the sea. I was no longer just an aggrieved daughter. I was a potential deep throat. The final signal came at 5:30 p.m., a single, encrypted message from my contact at Quiet Harbor Capital. It contained only 8 words. The temperature is optimal. It's time to lift the lid. They saw it. 2. The company's stock had dipped 3% in after-hours trading. The reputational damage was escalating. The board, particularly the VC representatives, would be in a state of controlled panic. The moment was perfect. The pressure was at its peak. I opened the file I had prepared the night before. The formal request for an emergency meeting of the board of directors. I unblanked the grievances section and listed the 2 primary articles. Gross conflict of interest and potential fraud related to the Mintford Analytics contracts. Material breach of the corporate ethics code by CFO Elena Maris, constituting a direct threat to key government contracts. I attached the full evidence package, the E001 multi-angle video of the slap, the FOIA 2025-481516 request confirmation, the legal hold notice served to their counsel that morning, and finally, a 20-page preliminary audit summary of the Mintford fraud, complete with flowcharts showing the money trail, compiled and digitally signed by Babel. My 18% proxy stake meant they could not legally refuse the request. The evidence meant they could not ignore it. I addressed the email to the corporate secretary with the entire board of directors and the general counsel copied. I took a deep breath. The click of the mouse sending the email was quiet, almost anticlimactic. It felt less like an explosion and more like a key turning in a lock. I closed my laptop. My part in the public spectacle was over. The rest of the battle would be fought in private, behind closed doors. The official summons arrived in my inbox 2 hours later. A curt, formal PDF. An emergency meeting of the board of directors of Evermere Systems was called to order. The location? The main boardroom, 28th floor. The time? 9:00 a.m. 2 days from now. The date on the summons was October 20th, exactly 2 years to the day I had boarded a plane for my exile. The 28th floor of the Evermere Tower is a place designed to exist above the clouds. The boardroom is its heart, a long, sterile chamber of glass and brushed steel. One wall is a single pane of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of Grayford Heights. The opposite wall is polished Italian marble, cold and veined like a slab in a morgue. The table is a vast, reflective black monolith, so polished you can see the distorted faces of the people sitting around it. It's a room built for intimidation, not collaboration. I had been there for 10 minutes, sitting in a small anteroom, watching them arrive on a security feed I'd patched into on my phone. They filed in one by one, a collection of men in expensive suits, their faces grim. My father's old guard, the golfers, looked confused and uncomfortable. The 2 VC reps, sharp and predatory, looked merely annoyed, their eyes constantly flicking to their phones. They took their usual seats around the black table. My father, Grant Quinn, entered last, taking his position at the head of the table. He looked tired, the confident corporate mask from the airport interview stripped away, leaving a strained, anxious man in its place. Elena was at his right hand, a study in defiant composure. She wore a severe dark gray power suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight, immaculate chignon. She placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table in front of her. On its spine, embossed in small gold letters, was a single word: garden. She was ready for a fight on her own terms, armed with her own secret numbers. She believed she was untouchable. She believed this meeting was about the airport video, a public relations crisis she could manage. She had no idea she was walking into an autopsy. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I stood up. I smoothed the front of my simple black dress, picked up my rolling suitcase, the same one from the airport, and walked to the boardroom door. I didn't knock. I pushed it open. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. 12 pairs of eyes swiveled towards me, a flicker of surprise, of contempt, of confusion. They saw me, the exiled daughter, and dismissed me as an interloper, a distraction. The corporate secretary, a nervous man named Arthur Pym, stood from his small desk in the corner. "Ms. Quinn," he stammered. "This is a closed meeting of the board." "I know, Arthur," I said calmly. I walked past the end of the table and took the single, empty chair at the far end, directly opposite my father. I placed my suitcase on the floor beside me. My father's face hardened. "Vera, this is not the time or the place for—" "Please, Arthur," I said, cutting him off, my voice even and carrying in the room's perfect acoustics. "Call the meeting to order. State for the record who requested it." Arthur looked at my father, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. But the corporate bylaws were absolute. Arthur's loyalty was to the company, not to the CEO. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the official request on his tablet. "An emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Evermere Systems is hereby called to order on this day, October 20th, 2025, he recited, his voice trembling slightly. This meeting was convened by a shareholder coalition representing 18.3% of voting stock, under the authority of Ms. Vera Quinn, by proxy. The silence in the room was absolute. The name, my name, hung in the air. Elena's mask of composure cracked, a fine, hairline fracture of disbelief. The VC reps sat up straighter, their annoyance instantly replaced by a sharp, calculating interest. They smelled blood, and they didn't care whose it was. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "You may want to start recording the minutes." I didn't wait for permission. I opened my suitcase, took out my laptop, and placed it on the table. I connected a small dongle in the room's massive 8K monitor. The one that took up half the marble wall flickered to life, mirroring my screen. "I have 2 items on the agenda. We'll begin with the matter of Mintford Analytics." Elena flinched. It was a small, almost invisible reaction, but I saw it. It was the first sign of genuine fear. On the screen, a flowchart bloomed into existence. It was a clean, elegant diagram generated by Babel. On the left, a box labeled Evermere Systems, Operating Expenses. On the right, a series of boxes labeled with the account numbers of offshore trusts. In between, a spiderweb of transactions flowed through shell corporations, all converging on a single, central node. Mintford Analytics. A final, thick red line connected Mintford to the trusts, and a name was clearly displayed beneath them. Beneficiary, J. Morris. "For the past 3 years," I began, my voice as clinical as the diagram on the screen, "Evermere has paid over $4 million to a consulting firm for services that, as far as my audit can determine, were never rendered. These payments were structured as round-number invoices, consistently approved by the CFO's office, and funneled through a network of holding companies to a trust whose sole beneficiary is Julian Maris, the brother of our CFO, Elena Maris." I clicked a key. The flowchart was replaced by a screenshot of an email, its header and metadata clearly visible. It was from Elena's work account to her brother's personal account, retrieved from Mintford's servers during my creditor's audit. Subject, Q3. Invoicing Julian. Please remember to adjust the next bid up by 3%, To cover the consulting fee for the Henderson project. We need to keep the garden tidy. A low murmur went around the table. The phrase, "the garden tidy," was a piece of corporate poetry I was particularly proud of uncovering. "This is an outrageous fabrication." Elena's voice was sharp, a shard of glass. "My brother's business is his own. This is slander." "It's bookkeeping," I corrected her. I clicked again. A series of notarized documents appeared on the screen. The chain of ownership for Mintford, tracing it from Delaware to Wyoming to the Morris Family Trust. It was irrefutable. "Vera, stop this." My father's voice was a low growl. He was on his feet, his hands pressed flat on the black table. His face was pale. "You are tearing this house down. This is your family, your legacy." I met his gaze across the vast expanse of the table. "I'm locking the windows," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "You're the one who left them open for thieves." I didn't give him time to respond. I hit the next key on my laptop. The screen went black for a second, then exploded with the chaotic, shaky footage from the airport. The slap, the sound, amplified by the boardroom's state-of-the-art sound system, was shockingly loud. It was the multi-angle video Babel had compiled. In the bottom corner, a timestamp ran with millisecond precision. Beside it, a small, official-looking seal read, "Babel Forensic Authentication." The logo of HRI News 7 was clearly visible in one of the quadrants. It played on a loop, the slap cracking through the silent room again and again. Elena shrank back in her chair as if she'd been struck again. The color drained from her face. This, she understood. The numbers were abstract, but the video was visceral, undeniable. I let it play 3 times before I paused it on a perfect, clear frame of her face, contorted in rage, her hand connecting with my cheek. "Mr. Davies," I said, turning to the company's general counsel, a man known for his unflappable demeanor and devotion to legal scripture. "Would you please read for the board Section 4, Subsection C, of the Corporate Governance and Ethics Handbook?" Davies, a man in his late 60s, adjusted his glasses. He looked at my father, then at me. He was a creature of the law. He picked up the thick binder in front of him, his fingers finding the page with practiced ease. His voice was a dry, emotionless monotone as he read the words aloud. "An executive officer engaging in public behavior that brings the company into disrepute, including but not limited to acts of violence, shall be considered to be in material breach of their employment contract." He paused, then continued. "Such a breach is grounds for immediate suspension of duties pending a full investigation by the board and may impact the company's standing on contracts requiring moral and ethical character reviews." He closed the binder. The click echoed in the tomb-like silence of the room. The video on the screen was the definition of public behavior. The clause he had just read was the loaded gun. I stood up. I had presented the evidence of financial rot. I had presented the evidence of public disgrace. Now, I would present the solution. "I have a proposal for the board," I announced, my voice clear and steady. "I move for the immediate suspension of Elena Morris from her position as Chief Financial Officer. Effective immediately, I move for the hiring of an independent, external firm to conduct a full forensic audit of the Mintford Analytics contracts and any related party transactions. And I move that this board calls a special shareholders meeting within 30 days to vote on a permanent resolution." I looked around the table. My father's old friends looked lost. My father himself seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. But the VC reps, the ones who only cared about cash flow, were looking at me with a new, sharp respect. I had not come to them with a family problem. I had come to them with a fiscal and contractual liability, and I had handed them a clean, legal way to excise it. I had turned the key. The tumblers had fallen. The vault was open. The silence that followed my proposal was a physical weight. The looping video of the slap was frozen on the screen, an emblem of public disgrace hanging over the room. My father was still standing, his face a mask of disbelief. His old friends on the board looked at him, then at me, their expressions lost in searching for a cue. The general counsel, Mr. Davies, remained impassively neutral. his duty fulfilled. But the two men from the venture capital funds were no longer looking at me with respect. They were looking at me with the cold, hard focus of mathematicians solving an equation. I hadn't just given them a problem, I had given them a solution, a clean cut. It was Elena who broke the silence, a short, sharp laugh, utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of a cornered animal trying to project strength. "A proposal?" she sneered, her voice regaining its familiar, icy condescension. She looked around the table, seeking to rally her allies. "That's all this is. A little girl's tantrum with a PowerPoint presentation. You hold 18%. 18. It's a respectable stake. I'll grant you that. But it is not a majority. Without a majority vote. Vera, you are nothing but noise, and this board does not react to noise." She was right, of course. On the surface, the rules were clear. A vote would be called. My father and his allies held a slim majority. They could vote down my motion, table it indefinitely, and bury the problem under a mountain of internal reviews and legal challenges. They could weather the PR storm. It would be costly, but they could do it. She believed she still held the power. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply leaned down and opened my suitcase again. The men at the table watched, a flicker of curiosity in their eyes. They expected more documents, more evidence. I reached past my laptop, past the folders, and my fingers closed around a cold, heavy piece of metal. I lifted it out. It was a key, not a modern car key or a flimsy house key. It was an old, ornate, institutional key, the kind made of brass, heavy and substantial in my palm, the kind of key that opens a very large, very important door. I placed it on the black reflective surface of the table. I didn't slide it. I set it down with a quiet, definitive thud. The sound was small, but it seemed to absorb all the other noise in the room. The key lay there, an anachronism of brass against the room's modern steel and glass. "What is that?" one of the VCs, a man named Caldwell, asked, his voice sharp. "Symbolism?" "Leverage," I replied calmly. "That is the master key to the building we are currently sitting in. Not a copy, the original." My father stared at it. "That's impossible. The building is mortgaged through First National." "It was," I corrected him. "As of last week, the commercial mortgage note for the Evermere Systems headquarters was acquired in a private sale by a new creditor, a Nevada-based holding company called Alder Row Holdings." A wave of understanding, cold and immediate, washed over the faces of Caldwell and his partner. They understood debt. They understood leverage. My father and his friends were still catching up. "You bought our building?" one of them asked, incredulous. "No," I said. "I didn't need to. I bought your debt, a much more powerful position. And a commercial mortgage of this size, as you know, is not just a loan, it's a complex legal agreement. It comes with covenants." I let that word hang in the air. Covenants, the rules, the fine print that everyone ignores until it's too late. "Specifically," I continued, my voice level and measured, "it comes with a key person morals covenant. It's a standard clause in loans of this size, designed to protect the lender from the kind of reputational damage that could devalue the asset or disrupt the borrower's ability to pay. It stipulates that if a key executive, and the CFO is specifically named, commits an act of public moral turpitude that materially harms the company's reputation or its contractual relationships, the lender has certain rights." I paused, letting the general counsel, Mr. Davies, mentally confirm the standard legality of such a clause. I saw the slight, affirmative dip of his head. "The act of this board voting to suspend Elena for the reasons I have presented," I explained, connecting the final dots for them, "is the official, legal acknowledgement that such a breach has occurred. The moment you pass my motion, you contractually validate the breach. The moment you admit the problem, you trigger the covenant. You hand me the gun." Elena's face was a deathly white. She was finally beginning to understand. This wasn't a corporate raid. It was a siege. And she was the one who had just opened the city gates from the inside. As the new creditor, I laid out their options. Alder Row Holdings would have several remedies. First, we could call the entire $100 million loan due, immediately. Second, we could declare a major breach and force a reappraisal of the property in the current, somewhat depressed, commercial real estate market, which would undoubtedly lead to a significant and painful increase in your monthly payments. Or third, I offered, a sliver of false generosity in my tone. We could classify this as a minor breach and simply invoke the penalty clause, a 20% increase in the interest rate, retroactive for the last 12 months. I had Babel run the numbers. The penalty payment would be somewhere in the region of $12 million, payable within 30 days. The room was utterly still. I had them. The fraud was a matter for the lawyers. The public relations crisis was a matter for the spin doctors. But the $12 million penalty, or the catastrophic loss of their headquarters, that was a matter for the two men from the venture capital funds. That was a direct hit to their bottom line. To tighten the screw one last time, I added, and I believe, according to the schedule I saw before my rotation, that the company is slated to sign the new 5-year logistics contract with the DoD this Friday. I imagine it would be inconvenient to be in default on your headquarters mortgage, or worse, facing eviction, during that signing. I'm sure your government partners would find that very reassuring. Checkmate. I stood up and walked to the head of the table where Elena sat. Frozen. I placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. It was a resignation letter. Simple, comprehensive, and effective immediately. Beside it, I placed a second document, a legally binding agreement to repay the full $4 million from the Mintford fraud within 90 days. However, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I am, at heart, a reasonable person. Alder Row Holdings is prepared to be a patient and understanding creditor. We will waive all penalties. We will not reappraise the property. We will not call the loan. We will, in fact, refinance at a more favorable rate. I tapped the documents with my finger. If Ms. Maris signs both of these, right now, if she resigns and agrees to make the company whole, then this all goes away. The debt becomes manageable again. You keep your headquarters, you sign your contract on Friday, and we can all move on. I turned back to the room. The choice was theirs. Protect Elena and face financial ruin, or cut her loose and save themselves. For the men who dealt in pure profit and loss, it wasn't a choice at all. Caldwell, the VC, didn't even look at Elena. He looked at my father. His expression was utterly devoid of sympathy. Grant, he said, his voice flat. Fix this, now. My father's shoulders slumped. The fight was gone. He leaned over to his wife who had been his partner in building this empire, the woman for whom he had cast out his own daughter. His voice was barely audible, a dry, rasping sound of utter defeat. Elena, he whispered, sign it. She looked at him, her eyes wide with betrayal. Then her gaze swept around the long, black table. She was looking for a single friendly face, a single ally who would stand with her. She found none. The golfers wouldn't meet her eye. The VCs stared back with the impassive expressions of executioners. My father just stared at the table. The board had turned. The table had turned. Her entire world had just flipped upside down. With a trembling hand, she reached for the pen I had placed next to the papers. It was a simple, black fountain pen. Her knuckles were white as she picked it up. She uncapped it. The small click loud in the silence. She bent over the pages, her immaculate hair falling forward for the first time. She signed her name. The stroke of the pen was shaky. The elegant loop of her E, a jagged, broken thing. The ink was a dark, wet stain of surrender. Elena's hand, still trembling, pushed the signed documents across the reflective black table. The pen rolled slightly, its black ink still wet on the signature line. The act was complete. She was a ghost now, sitting at a table where she no longer held a place. The room's occupants, her former allies, pointedly avoided her gaze. They were already moving on, recalculating, reassessing the new landscape. My gaze lifted from the signed resignation and settled on the man at the head of the table. My father. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, a complex mixture of shock, betrayal, and a strange, unwelcome flicker of pride. He was still the CEO. He was still the chairman of the board, but the power that had radiated from him, the power I had both respected and resented my entire life, was gone. It had been transferred, not to me, but to the men from the VC funds, who now held the proxy on his survival, and they were looking at me. I didn't speak to them. I spoke directly to him. The room remained silent, waiting for the next move, the final piece to fall. "Dad," I said. The word felt foreign, a relic from a different life. I corrected myself, my voice becoming colder, more precise. "Grant, the board has a second crisis to manage. The Mintford fraud happened on your watch. The ethics breach happened on your watch. You opened the door to the thief, and you stood by while she acted. The curbside CFO hashtag is damaging, but a CEO Canoe hashtag would be fatal. It would kill the DoD contract on Friday." I let the implications settle. His complicity, or at best his negligence, made him as much a liability as she was. I turned to the VC reps, Caldwell and his partner. "The market needs a clear signal of change, a clean break. The government needs to know the ROT has been cut out, root and stem." I turned back to my father. "So, you have a choice. Do you want to keep your seat, or do you want to keep your name?" He didn't understand. He was still thinking in terms of fighting, of holding on. "What are you talking about, Vera? This is my company." "It was your company," Caldwell interjected, his voice flat and final. "Right now, it's a company in breach of its loan covenants, with a PR crisis that's threatening our primary revenue stream. What Ms. Quinn is offering you is a choice. We'd like to hear it." I stood and walked slowly, halfway down the table, so I was no longer at the opposite end, but in the center. I was no longer an accuser. I was the one proposing the new structure. "I am not proposing we fire you. Grant, your name is on the building. Firing you creates more chaos, more questions. It suggests the problem is deeper, that it goes all the way to the top, which it does, but we can't afford to admit that." I slid another single-page document across the table to him. "This is an amendment to your employment contract. It's a face-saving exit. You will voluntarily step down from all day-to-day operational duties as CEO. Effective immediately, you will retain the title of chairman of the board, but in a non-executive, honorary capacity. You will have no voting rights. You will not interfere. You will be, for all intents and purposes, a figurehead." "A figurehead," he repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "A respected founder," I countered, "who is choosing to step back to focus on strategic, long-term philanthropy, while a new leadership team takes over to realign the company's core values. That's what the press release will say. You get to keep your office on this floor for 12 months. You get to keep your salary for 12 months. You get to attend the ribbon cutting for the new contract on Friday, smiling, as the founder. You get to keep your name. In exchange, you give me your proxy, all of it, and you endorse the board's decision. You endorse me." The room was silent. This was the true coup, not just the removal of Elena, but the complete transfer of power. My father stared at the document. He had built this company from a single room with 2 computers. He had poured his entire life into it. He had sacrificed his first marriage to it, and he had just sacrificed his second. And now, I was asking him to give it to me. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, not for mercy, but for an answer. His voice was low, almost a whisper, a genuine question from a man I barely knew. "Did you ever once," he asked, "need my forgiveness?" It was a father's question. He was looking for a human connection, a sign that this was about us, about the exile, about the pain. He was hoping for a tearful, dramatic confession that would recenter him as the father, the one with the power to absolve. I denied him. I denied him the comfort of melodrama. This was not a family reconciliation. This was a leveraged buyout of his authority. "No," I said, my voice as flat and hard as the marble on the wall. "I didn't need your forgiveness. I needed transparent contracts. I needed a head of risk assessment who was allowed to do her job. I needed a CEO who valued integrity more than he valued his new wife's secret ledger. You failed as a CEO. My forgiveness is irrelevant." The personal rejection hit him harder than the loss of his company. The last bit of air seemed to deflate from his chest. Caldwell cleared his throat. "The board," he said, speaking for everyone now, "finds this proposal acceptable. It provides stability. It provides a clear narrative of change, and it resolves the leadership crisis. We need a vote on the transition. We need an acting CEO." "I nominate Vera Quinn as interim CEO," his partner said immediately, "contingent on Grant's acceptance of the new arrangement and the transfer of his proxy." Caldwell nodded. "I second the motion." He looked at my father. "Grant, the choice is yours. A graceful exit or a forced one. We have the votes to remove you for cause right now. Citing the same negligence that applies to the Mintford case, this is your only off-ramp." My father looked at the key on the table. He looked at the signed resignation from his wife. He looked at me, his daughter, standing there with no emotion on my face, only the cold, clear focus of a strategist who had accounted for every move. He had been outplayed, completely and utterly. He picked up the black pen, the same one Elena had used. He signed the amendment. Then he leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, the sound of the air escaping the cushion a long, weary sigh. He looked, in that single instant, like he had aged 20 years. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just an old man in a glass tower. "The motion passes," Caldwell said. I nodded once, accepting the new reality. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph. It was just the logical conclusion of a 2-year plan. I was now in charge. I immediately picked up the conference phone in the center of the table and dialed the head of corporate communications. "Sarah," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, "please send the company-wide notice I staged in your draft folder this morning, the one titled, 'All Hands Meeting,' effective in 30 minutes, main atrium, yes, mandatory." I hung up. The first order of business was to address the employees, my true power base. Elena, who had been sitting in a state of catatonic shock, began to gather her things, her leather garden folder, her phone, her tablet. She moved with a stiff, robotic grace, her eyes focused on her own hands, refusing to look at anyone, especially not at me. She pushed her chair back. 2 security guards, whom I had asked to wait in the hall, entered the room. They were impassive, professional. They stood by the door, waiting. Elena's face flushed with a final, deep humiliation. I looked at the head of security. "Follow procedure," I said, my voice clear, for the whole board to hear. "She is to be escorted from the building, box her personal office items and have them couriered to her home. There is to be no spectacle, no humiliation, no perp walk for the lobby cameras." The guard nodded. I turned my gaze back to the board, to my father, to the room. This was not a show. It wasn't about public shaming. I walked back to my chair, picked up the brass key, and slipped it into my pocket. It was about clearing the table. The main atrium of the Evermere building is a cathedral of corporate ambition. 4 stories of open space, walled in glass, with a floor of polished white terrazzo that reflects the cold. Recessed lighting from the ceiling high above. It was designed to make employees feel small, to inspire awe for the institution. Today, it felt like an arena. 600 people stood on that floor. Engineers, accountants, marketing staff, coders, project managers, administrative assistants. They had been summoned by a terse company-wide email, and they stood in uncertain clusters, their hushed conversations creating a low, anxious murmur that echoed in the vast space. They had all seen the news. They had all heard the rumors that were now spreading through the company's internal chat channels like wildfire. They knew the CFO was gone. They knew the CEO had been sidelined, and now they were waiting to see who was left. I walked out onto the small, raised dais that was used for company announcements. I wore the same simple black dress from the boardroom. I carried no notes. Behind me, the massive digital screen that usually displayed stock prices and company slogans was blank and black. The murmur in the crowd died. 600 faces turned towards me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and fear. I was a ghost to most of them, a half-remembered name from 2 years ago, the CEO's daughter, the one who was sent away. I let the silence stretch, letting them see me, letting them understand that the person they were told to forget was now the only one in charge. "My name is Vera Quinn," I began, my voice clear and amplified by the room's sound system, but I did not raise it. 2 years ago, I was the head of risk assessment for this company. My job was to find problems. I found one, and I was sent away for it. Today, I am your interim CEO, and my job is still to find problems. I saw the ripple of understanding, of confirmation, pass through the crowd. I was not going to lie to them. For too long, I continued. The tools of oversight at this company have been used to hunt you, to monitor you, to intimidate you, to ensure compliance through fear. Financial controls were not about protecting the company's assets. They were about protecting the people at the top. That ends now. I gestured to the blank screen behind me. You may have heard whispers of a secret financial ledger, a place where the real numbers were kept, a system some called the garden, a place where problems were buried. As of this morning, the garden has been permanently deleted. Its servers have been wiped. It no longer exists. A low gasp went through some of the senior staff in the front. This was heresy. It was the dismantling of a holy text. In its place, I said, we are instituting a new system. I call it Babel. I built it myself. It is an algorithmic auditing tool. But its purpose is not to hunt for your mistakes. Its purpose is to protect you. It is designed to find waste, to find fraud, to find the leaks that drain the resources that should be going to your salaries, to your benefits, to your projects. Babel is a shield for all of us, and it will be transparent. Its quarterly reports will be available to every employee. I paused, and to help it, we are creating a new channel, an anonymous, encrypted whistleblower portal, managed by a third-party ethics firm. If you see something wrong, if you see waste or fraud, you report it. And if your report leads to a recovery of funds, you will receive 10% of that recovery. No questions asked, no retaliation, a cash reward. Because the people who protect this company should be rewarded, not exiled. This was new. A murmur, no longer anxious but intrigued, passed through the crowd. I had their attention. Now, I had to earn their trust. But a company is not just about contracts and numbers. It's about people. In my 2 years away, I became aware of the struggles some of you have faced. I became aware of how our company's resources were being misused, while our own people were falling through the cracks. I looked out at them, letting my gaze pass over their faces. I am talking about the engineer in the avionics division whose wife needed experimental cancer treatment. I am talking about the coder in the logistics department whose son needed round-the-clock nursing care. I'm talking about the 23 families who were forced to choose between their jobs and the health of their loved ones because the company's hardship fund was inadequate. I saw a man in the third row, a senior engineer I recognized, put a hand to his mouth. I saw a woman in the back begin to cry silently. They didn't know how I knew. They didn't know it was me who had intervened. As of this morning, I have authorized a full transfer of funds to make the Employee Hardship Fund permanently solvent. Every outstanding medical bill for those 23 families has been paid in full. From now on, that fund will be your right, not a charity. You give this company your talent. You give it your time. You will not be asked to give it your family's well-being. I held up a hand. You owe me nothing for this. You owe the anonymous donors who contributed nothing. Just get your families well. That is all. The emotion in the room had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a stunned, fragile hope. Now, for the final, brutal truth. "I know you have questions about the leadership changes," I said, my voice returning to a clinical calm. "Here are the facts. Elena Maris has resigned from her position as CFO, effective immediately. Her departure is linked to an independent investigation into financial irregularities, specifically concerning the contracts with a vendor named Mintford Analytics. That contract has been terminated. My father, Grant Quinn, is stepping back from his role as CEO. He will remain as a non-executive chairman. This was his decision, made to ensure a stable transition and to signal a new era of accountability." I let them absorb the seismic news. Then, I prepared for the final act. The reason for this emergency meeting, the reason for all of this, began with an event 2 nights ago. Some of you have seen the video online. The screen behind me flickered to life. It was not the small, shaky clip from the news. It was Babel's authenticated, multi-angle reconstruction. For 15 seconds, the silent, high-resolution footage played. It showed Elena's lunge. It showed my stillness. It showed the slap from 3 different angles. The impact shockingly clear in the cold, white light of the atrium. I paused it on the frame of impact. "I am not showing you this to humiliate a person who is no longer with this company," I said, my voice low and firm. "Humiliation is a weapon. I am not here to wage war. I am showing you this because it is a symbol. It is a line. The line between authority and abuse. The line between professional and personal. The line between a boss and a bully. That line was crossed. And my first promise to all of you, as your CEO, is that this line will never be crossed again, not against me, and not against a single one of you, ever." I let the image hang there for a moment longer, a silent testament. Then the screen went black. The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of 600 people holding their breath, processing 2 years of fear and a decade of corporate culture being dismantled in the space of 10 minutes. Then, from the 3rd row, the senior engineer, the man whose wife's medical bills I had paid, raised his hand. His face was etched with the lines of exhaustion and relief. He didn't ask a question. He made a statement, his voice cracking with emotion but carrying across the silent hall. "Welcome home, boss." And then, the applause started. It wasn't the thunderous, roaring ovation of a political rally. It was slow to begin, a scattered clapping that grew not in volume, but in weight. It was a heavy, profound sound, like a deep, powerful wave rolling onto the shore. It was the sound of 600 people exhaling at once, the sound of fear being replaced by resolve. It was the sound of support. I stood there and let it wash over me. I did not smile. I simply inclined my head in a small, formal bow of acknowledgement. When the applause finally subsided, I spoke my last words to them. "We come home to work," I said. "Not to be afraid. Now, let's get back to it." As I turned to leave the dais, the massive automated glass doors at the far end of the atrium began to slide open, either by coincidence or by the timing of a security guard. The late afternoon sun, which had been hidden behind the neighboring skyscrapers, streamed in, cutting through the cavernous space in long, golden bars of light that fell across the white terrazzo floor. A new light was entering the building. I didn't stay to watch the crowd disperse. My work in the atrium was done. As the employees began to move, their conversations starting up again, no longer whispers but energized, hopeful discussions. I turned and walked towards the executive elevators. I didn't go up to the 28th floor. To the CEO's office? Not yet. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor has a small, rarely used glass terrace that overlooks the manicured corporate park. It's a quiet, sterile space with a few metal benches and some potted, uninspired shrubs. It was a place to be alone. The automatic glass door slid open with a soft hiss, and I stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfect green lawn. The sky was a bruised purple and orange. I reached into the pocket of my dress and my fingers found the brass key. I pulled it out. It was heavy, its metal cool against my skin. I stood there, looking out at the landscaped perfection of the Evermere campus, and I placed the key in the palm of my hand, my other hand cupping it, letting my own body heat slowly warm the cold metal. It was a tangible object, a solid piece of a new reality. The weight of it was the weight of ownership, of control, of responsibility. It was the key to their debt, their building, their future, my future. My phone, which had been silent all day, vibrated in my pocket. A single, sharp buzz. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my lawyers or from Quiet Harbor, but the message was from an unsaved number, a number I knew by heart, but had deleted 2 years ago. The message contained only 2 words, "Welcome home." It was from Grant, from my father. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement, a concession, a final, quiet surrender. I looked up from the phone, at my own reflection in the tinted glass of the terrace door. The woman staring back was not the invisible daughter who had been sent away. Her face was pale. Her expression was tired, but her eyes were clear. There were no shadows of fear or doubt in them. She was no longer a ghost in her own house. I typed my reply, my thumb steady on the screen. 4 letters, a statement of fact, a declaration. I am home. I hit send. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. I wouldn't be looking at it again tonight. I walked back inside, to a small, temporary office I had requested. On the desk was a single stack of papers, the first official directives requiring my signature as interim CEO. I picked up the pen. The first document on top was the one that mattered most. It was a transfer order, Directive 001. It authorized the immediate reallocation of all recovered funds from the Mintford Analytics settlement. It did not direct the money back into the company's general operating budget. It directed every single one of the $4 million into the newly solvent Employee Hardship Fund. My first official act was not to consolidate power, but to give it away. I signed my name at the bottom, Vera Quinn. The ink was dark and certain. As I stood there in the quiet office, I could still feel a faint, phantom sensation, a memory carried on the recycled air. It was the wind from the airport curb, still tangled somewhere in my hair, the sharp, acrid scent of jet fuel, the perfume of my return. But it was already fading, becoming a part of the past. There would be no more apologies needed. There would be no more slaps. The violence was over. The accounts were being settled. I turned and walked out of the office, my footsteps echoing softly in the empty hallway. The automatic glass door at the end of the corridor slid closed behind me with a gentle, mechanical whisper, the locks engaging with a quiet click. The table was cleared. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video, and give it a boost by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.